A die-hard Chevy man goes to extremes to save a rare piece of pony car history.
We had the fever from day one, especially on weekends, Fridays and Saturday nights. Few speed contests, let's put it that way. We busted up a lot of equipment. Now I'm here trying to save every one of these cars, and can't save everyone, but I can save one or two.
While a lifelong Ford man breaks down at the sight of his all-time dream machine.
When we got up to his house, and when he took the cover off of it and saw the tears streaming down my face, he said, "This car is yours."
Jumping into the ring, Chrysler totally redesigns its outrageous muscle car in the winner-take-all main event. 3 pieces of automotive muscle, a 3-round tag team match fought on the car lots of America, 3 guys whose pony cars galloped away with their hearts. Jim Aberts is a dedicated, dyed-in-the-wool Ford man. Full stop. End of story. He worked for Ford as a partsman in Pennsylvania for 40 years.
I've been associated with Ford in a dealership role all that time. A great company to work for. Always been a dedicated Ford person. People see the blue here, I tell them that's blue ovals going through there. And a lot of my friends call me Jimmy Ford, or Mustang Jim, or something of that nature.
Jim has owned a lot of Ford Mustangs over the years, but the most important Stang in his corral is his current stallion, a 1970 Boss Mustang 302. Jim knows exactly why the Boss is his favorite. It's part of a well-documented piece of road racing history known as the Pony Wars that goes back 4 decades. Back then, Ford and Chevrolet had taken their hotly contested sales wars to the racetrack, namely the Trans Am Racing Series, organized by the Sports Car Club of America. Heading into the 1970 season, Chevy and their famous Camaros had won the previous 2 championships, and Ford was desperate to win the title. The Boss 302 was built to lead the charge. The result was one of the most exciting seasons of road racing in the history of North American motorsport. Ford emerged victorious that year, and for Jim, that's reason enough to own a Boss 302.
This is what makes a Boss 302 a Boss 302. Ford only made them for 2 years, in 1969 and 70. This car has a shaker hood scoop. They built 1,628 of them in 69 and 7,013 in 1970, and that was it. By standard production numbers, is pretty low. This car has the rear slats. It also has the Magnum wheels, and this has a deluxe interior with all the wood grain appointments.
Jim's ultimate Mustang came to him in 1997 from a friend who knew exactly who would appreciate the storied history of this marque.
When he came into the dealership that day, he just walked up to the counter and said, "I want to sell my car and I want you to have it." And actually, we never even talked about money. When we got up to his house, and when he took the cover off of it and saw the tears streaming down my face, he said, "This car is yours." And I said, "Well, what do you want for it?" He says, "What do you want to give me for it?" And I gave him a figure, and he said, "Okay." I could have told him $5. I think he just said okay, because he wanted me to have it. And yeah, that was, an emotional day.
Jim Aberts is a die-hard Ford man who believes his bone stock 1970 Boss 302 is the only Mustang anyone could ever want to own.
I knew about the car, it had a lot of my old parts on it from the other car, but I hadn't really actually seen it. That was the time when I knew I had to have this car. I mean, it was the right car, it was the right year, it was the right color, it was the right everything. I like my cars, bone stock, original, and that's what this car is.
But though Jim enjoys driving his Boss, he's the only one. He hasn't allowed anyone else to slide behind the wheel.
Nobody else has driven this car in 13 years. My daughter's never driven it, my wife's never driven it, and I won't let anybody else drive it, so maybe those two I would, but nobody else. So I'm the only one that's driven it in 13 years.
Jim was tempted to sell his prize Mustang only once in 2006. A potential buyer tried to prove his worthiness by driving across the state to make a significant offer.
It was a Sunday, the day that he was coming to bring me the check in hand to buy this. Him and his wife were coming over from Jersey, and Joan and I got back from church, I says, I'm gonna go out and start the Boss one last time. Maybe I'll take it for a little spin. Went out in the garage, started it up. I heard those lifters clacking. I smelled that exhaust. I can't sell this car. So I had tears running down my face. Went back in the house, Joan says, I knew you weren't gonna sell that car. I told you not to sell it. I'm too attached to it.
In the end, Mustang Jimmy kept his car and his nickname.
When I'm out in this car, I'm Parnelli Jones. Doesn't matter if I'm not wearing the brain bucket or going, 100 miles an hour. This car to me represents, what Ford racing is all about.
Turns out some things just can't be bought or sold, like reliving the greatest racing year of all time. That and a perfect orange 1970 Mustang Boss 302. His Ford marks the end of an era, but not everyone is on Team Blue Oval. Some guys live and die by their Chevys. Skip LaCates is a bit of a contradiction. On the one hand, he has a serious need for speed. On the other, he thinks nothing of spending thousands of hours restoring a single automobile. That is, if the car in question happens to be a vintage muscle car, like the '69 Chevy Camaro SS. And no wonder, many consider this to be the last and perhaps the most perfect of the first generation of the legendary Chevy pony car.
This is an original 396, 375 horse car. This particular car came from the factory with the cowl induction hood. Most SS cars had a louvered hood. This car also has the red hockey stripe, as you can see. Some people might question the 15-inch tires and wheels on this car. The reason for that being, this is one of a handful of four-wheel disc brake cars, which is known as the JL8 option. Being one of the reasons I bought the car, how rare it was when I purchased it. I knew I had something different, just didn't know how much.
Skip's put in more than 2,000 hours restoring this car, and it shows. It's won numerous awards, including the prestigious Gold Award at the American Camaro Association Nationals. It's a rare time machine of a vehicle that's as authentic as it gets.
What I have here is the heart of this vehicle. The 375 horse is a motor that came with a factory aluminum intake and a Holley carburetor. A little bit more get up and go, if you want to put it that way. As you can see, we have all the original smog, alternator, everything is the correct date-coded parts. even down to the radiator, which took me I don't know how long to find an original radiator. We ended up buying one tank at a time and doing it that way, but I got what I needed. Everything's refinished, replated, pretty much so the way GM did it, only with a little more care and a little more concern. Delco battery, the R59 battery, you name it, it's all there. As far as the power goes, this was probably second in line to the 427 as far as power goes. They ran quite well in their day. I haven't been hard on this one yet, but I'll let it go for that. It's a great driving car.
Skip's determination to restore this car perfectly runs deep. He spent more than 600 hours on the paint job alone. Why such dedication? Well, it might be because he knows firsthand how rare it is to find a car like this in such good condition. In fact, he's part of the reason.
These particular cars, these particular engines, a lot did not survive. We were a little rough on them. At the drag strip Saturday, or maybe even at the drag strip on a Sunday, we continually flogged these cars. They really weren't made to be ran quite as hard as we were running them.
Skip grew up in York, Pennsylvania, home of the US 30 drag strip. As a teenager, he loved big carb V8s, hood scoops, and dual exhausts. In those days, Skip spent nearly all his spare time pushing cars just like this one to their limit and beyond it.
Well, we had the fever from day one, and we were always at the track. They had an area in York that they called the Loop, which all the kids drove it every night, and especially on weekends, Fridays and Saturday nights. Few speed contests, let's put it that way.
Those speed contests made Skip into a dedicated Chevy man with a true appreciation for horsepower. But that didn't always mean he had respect for the cars.
Over the years, we busted up a lot of equipment. My first good car, I think I had 9 motors in it in 5 years.
Blowing up your car every weekend had another consequence, too.
Back in the day, a lot of people can relate to this, that you only had one car. You didn't have multiple cars, so if you did, by any chance, hurt your car, you had to get it fixed because you had to go to work on Monday, or you might have even had a date on Saturday night. You needed your wheels. So you went up, you went to the junkyard, you went to your friends, wherever it might be, you got the needed parts, whether it be a motor, trans, whatever. Saturday afternoon, you installed them back into the car. Saturday night, you were back in town racing again.
As a result of all those quick fixes, the patchwork 60s muscle cars did not hold their value when compared to a revered true original. In car circles, a true original is known as a survivor. To be truly valuable these days, these time machines have to be mint, straight, and perfect. Most importantly, a survivor retains its original components, stamped with matching numbers from the factory. As for Skip, maybe he's making up for the past, but he wants to save as many true survivors as he can.
Can't save everyone, but I can save 1 or 2.
Skip's dream Camaro also required one more important element. It had to be black with 4-wheel disc brakes.
When I went to look at this car back in roughly 1987, one of the first things I did was to check to see if it was a real black car, or that it was, and being the 4-wheel disc brake option vehicle that it was, that was important to me, that was correct too, and that wasn't difficult to see. This vehicle had not been tampered with. So for those couple reasons, that and the big block, it piqued my interest very much so.
Sure enough, this beauty rolled off the line in a coat of factory tuxedo black. It's probably the hardest color to restore. Black paint shows every ripple and imperfection in a car's bodywork. So prepping a restored muscle car for a black paint job requires experience and lots of patience. Skip has both.
There was 580 to 600 hours in the paint on this car. We started with an outrageous body. We did things just a little bit different than norm. Instead of doing a base coat, clear coat process, we did single stage. And what that in reality gave us in the end was one more block sand, because then we cleared the car after we put on the final single stage black. And it gave us an additional block sand, which we kind of needed on a black car to make the car appear as straight as an arrow. So tough, but it was worth it.
Camaros from the late 60s reflect a time when sheer performance mattered more than fuel consumption and cup holders. A guy's reputation was made at the drag strip and the street light. Camaros and other pony cars cruised the roads of America when these cars were competing in the red-hot Trans Am Road Racing Series, further fueling the fire and desire for muscle cars. The guys who had to have these cars were in their late teens, and now some 40 years later, those baby boomers are chasing down the years, searching out the touchstone cars of their youth.
I spent roughly 2,000 to 3,000 hours on the car. A lot of time hitting flea markets, looking for parts, but I don't have a problem with that. That's me. I enjoy the hobby that much. Not saying I wouldn't do it again, but as hard as it is to find parts, good NOS parts for these cars, it's questionable if you want to be a part of it in that regard. Looking back on it, I wouldn't do anything different. Very, very happy with the car and the way it turned out. And, I will treat it better than I did my last ones.
In the case of Skip Lacates, the end of the road is a fine place to be. But the journey of finding his dream tuxedo black 1969 Chevy Camaro SS and bringing it back to life has been the ultimate ride. A long hood and short rear deck, 2 doors, and a massive V8 engine. In the late 1960s, those 4 design elements combined to create a truly unique American automobile design, the pony car.
This was competing with the cars of the Chevelle SS's, the Mustang Boss, and the other muscle cars, the Pontiac GTO, the Buick GSX, things like that. That's where the muscle car era was in full stride.
In 1964, 2 weeks before Ford rolled out their groundbreaking Mustang, Plymouth introduced American auto buyers to a brand new fastback coupe named the Barracuda, which inevitably came to be called simply the Cuda. 5 years later, as the steroidal pony wars reached their peak, Plymouth redesigned the Barracuda with a new, more muscular body and plenty of go-fast toys like a Hemi engine, a shaker hood, and a pistol grip 4-speed tranny. The National Automotive and Truck Model and Toy Museum in Auburn, Indiana is currently home to a very special Hemi Cuda. This is probably the rarest example of a 1970 Cuda anywhere on the planet. In car design studios, they call them time studies, and they're never meant to be sold to the public.
This was the first Hemi Cuda, 426, 425 horsepower Cuda that came off the line. This car was meant to be time study vehicles. They were put together, torn apart, put together, torn apart, so the mechanics and everything would know how long it takes to do if they had to do a repair on the car.
In 1970, the Cuda could be delivered to your Chrysler Plymouth dealer with one of 8 different engine packages under the hood, including one of the most potent V8 engines of the era.
Now you want to see the heart and the soul of this whole vehicle. Here we go, looking at the engine. Voila, what a power plant. Massive, big block, 426 Hemi. Chrysler likes to have a little fun with their product. They put the shaker decal on the underside of the hood, and it makes it look like you are seeing the engine shake and the hood shake as it goes.
While the 426 Hemi failed to propel the Cuda to the top of any Trans Am podiums that year, it still had all the right stuff for your average everyday muscle car freaks, right down to that 4-speed stick.
Here we have the distinctive front end of the Cuda. Notice the large grill area to allow more air in to cool that massive power plant, signified only with single headlamps on each side. The body lines of the CUDA come on back and they flow right into the coupe itself. Note we have the rally wheels with the glamour rings on it with Goodyear tires. Also, something famous that they had was the aluminum rockers here as stone guards on their rockers to help prevent the chips from the wide tires. Very, very aerodynamic, but yet sporty with the hardtop look with the smaller back window and no post. And then it flows right back into the tail end of the CUDA, which is very famous. Like most of the muscle cars, they had a pretty shallow trunk area, a rear deck that is not that large, but it flows right back into the famous tail end of the Barracuda with your 3 lights on each side, tail lights. Notice they are calling it the CUDA. They have dropped the Barracuda just because it is a more sporty, and it's what everybody called them anyway.
Other CUDA options included some wow colors, something to announce your arrival if the growl of the Hemi wasn't enough. High-impact, flashy colors such as Vitamin C, Inviolet, and Moulin Rouge. However, on the inside, no fancy trimmings here. It's all business.
This car has a wood steering wheel, a typical muscle car, no power steering other than your own. And then that made it all the more fun and pleasure to drive. There we go to the Hurst 4-speed shifter, and this has the famous Plymouth pistol grip on it. This will fit right in the palm of almost anyone's hand, and for a good hold on to the shift, and when you go through the shifts real hard. This way they could come out and they could shoot down the Mustangs and they could shoot down the Chevelles and not miss a gear.
Sadly, the CUDA's high-performance run was short-lived, and in 1974, like most pony cars of the day, the energy crisis spelled the end of an era. Production ended at Plymouth on April 1st, 1974, 10 years to the day after it had begun. Today, the Plymouth Barracuda is respected as a serious piece of muscle from the pony car era. Original 426 Hemi CUDAs are now prized collector vehicles, with bone stock versions like this one commanding sky-high prices.
The retail on this would have been $3,164. The current owner, who cherishes it tremendously, would sell it for the right price, but he's looking for a 7-figure price to sell it.
Back in 1970, the CUDA was designed to take on a stable of pony cars. Today, more than 4 decades later, it remains one of the most desirable muscle cars in the world, in style and in steel.